Welcome to Champs Unplugged, the podcast where we champion the voices of people with learning disabilities and autistic people in Cornwall. Join us as we chat about health, accessibility, and living our best lives.
Coming soon, Champs Unplugged, a brand new podcast made by people with a learning disability and autistic people right here in Cornwall.
We're here to share our stories, talk about the work we do in the community and chat with special guests to help make life better for people like us.
So if you want real conversations, great advice and inspiring stories,
tune in soon to Champs Unplugged, because everyone deserves to live a happy, healthy life.
Welcome to A Space to Speak Your Mind,
a radio programme and a podcast about mental health and well-being, made by people with lived experience as part of a wellbeing group run by Cornwall Mind.
We occasionally do cover subjects that some listeners may find distressing.
More information, help and support, please visit cornwallmind.org.
A space to speak your mind with Cornwall Mind.
I'm Samuel.
I'm Claire.
And I'm Victoria.
On this month's programme, we'll be finding out how smoking is affecting our mental and physical health with Olivia Davenport from Healthy Cornwall.
And I'll be chatting to Dorothy Herson, mental health activist, speaker and author of The Ragdoll Contract, talking about her new book based on her time as a lawyer at a Magic Circle law firm and highlighting the issue of insecure overachievers.
So first of all, let's welcome Olivia Davenport from Healthy Cornwall to the show.
A space to speak your mind with Cornwall Mind.
Okay, so we're joined by Olivia Davenport, Smoke-Free Generation Lead for Cornwall Council and Healthy Cornwall. Hi, Olivia.
Hi there.
And I'm joined here by the Space to Speak Your Mind team. I've got Claire and Samuel. So tell us about your role and what you're doing in Cornwall.
Yeah, so I'm the Smoke-Free Generation Lead, as you said, and I work in Healthy Cornwall, which is the health promotion team for Cornwall Council. So our team will deal with things like smoking as well as sort of weight management, and that covers all sort of age groups. So we've got some teams that work with children and young people, some that work with adults. But in regards to my role, I'm overseeing some smoke-free generation funding that has been given out to all councils in the UK to try and support more people to give up smoking. And also the fact that on Wednesday the 12th of March, it's No Smoking Day. So we're just trying to build a little bit more awareness of our service and how we can support smokers in Cornwall.
Super. So what is the offering for people who are looking to quit smoking in Cornwall?
Yeah, so it's obviously different across the UK, but in Cornwall, Healthy Cornwall offer a free stop smoking service that smokers can either self-refer to or might sometimes be referred to by a health professional. So most smokers that are in Trelisk will get offered the opportunity to be referred to us. GPs maybe will refer to us as well. Last year we had over 2,500 people setting quit dates with us, and we're seeing more people coming through year on year, even though the smoking rates are dropping year on year. So it's good that more people are aware of us. But in terms of what we can actually provide for smokers, we provide a combination of personalised advice and support and also access to different treatment options. So things like nicotine patches, nicotine gum. There's certain prescribed stop smoking medications and even vapes. The smoking advisor will normally support a smoker over the course of about 12 weeks and continue to provide that access to treatment as well as behavioural support. The research actually says if you use a stop smoking service, you're actually 3 times more likely to quit for good rather than just sort of doing it on your own. So that's why we try and get as many people as possible to come through to our service so that they're not struggling through a quit attempt on their own. And for anyone that has maybe used us before, we're not a one-time only service. Say if someone did end up smoking again, they can always come back to our service at any time.
That's fantastic. Do you think that when people have started smoking early, that it makes it much harder for them to break that addiction and to quit?
I think people tend to think that in the fact that they think, oh, I've been smoking for such a long time. They might have tried to give up lots of times before and maybe think maybe it's a bit too late for them, depending on what time of life they're in. I would say most smokers that we speak to do typically start in those sort of childhood, early years, but that doesn't ever stop them from being able to give up. In terms of sort of that older generation as well, over a quarter of our cases last year were actually people over the age of 65. And actually statistics show that the chances of people quitting smoking actually increases with age. So those older generations are actually typically more successful in their quit attempts than the younger age groups. And also for like someone that's maybe tried to give up smoking before, even if they've tried maybe 20, 30 times, I would urge someone like that to just not get disheartened or give up hope of being smoke-free, because the truth is that most smokers try to quit loads of times before they're actually successful. But with every quit attempt, they learn what helps them stay away from cigarettes and what triggers those cravings. And I think that's the key, is finding that culmination of the right situation, the right headspace, having a supportive environment around you, and having those right treatment options in place that maximises someone's chance of success. So sometimes I think people just maybe haven't had that chance in their life to give it the best go possible.
So my question for you is, what training have you had in this field?
So all of our stop smoking advisors are actually received training from the NCSCT. The NCSCT is the National Centre for Smoking Cessation and Training. So all of our advisors have that training and guidance. They have upskilling through our training programme in-house as well. As you can imagine, the world of smoking is ever-changing. So we keep up to date with latest policies, any changes in treatments, and make sure that that training is passed over to our advisors so that they're giving the clients the most up-to-date knowledge and guidance that they can.
So what was the primary reason why you decided that you wanted to support these smokers, possibly ex-smokers eventually, with their recovery?
So in terms of supporting smokers, we know that smoking has one of the biggest burdens on the NHS, on workplaces. It's so harmful to health. So in terms of trying to improve the health of the nation, it's a huge priority. And I think that's why the government are really on board with trying to do all that they can to get more people quit smoking. They've got this tobacco and vapes bill that's been going through Parliament around trying to actually increase the age at which people can buy cigarettes, so that eventually nobody will ever be able to buy cigarettes legally, because they will keep increasing the age. And the hope of that obviously being is that we'll have less people being impacted physically and mentally by cigarettes. In terms of the research, they recently found that a single cigarette takes about 20 minutes off a person's life, meaning that a typical pack of 20 cigarettes can actually shorten a person's life by nearly 7 hours. And 2 in 3 long-term smokers are expected to die from a smoking-related disease. So you can sort of understand there that there is a huge priority to raise awareness around the topic of smoking and try and get more people to quit smoking for their own benefit, but also for hopefully the benefit of public services generally.
And are there any tips that you would deem the most important for a smoker that's wanting to quit? What would be your main tip?
It's really hard to just pick the one. I don't think I could ever just give someone one tip and that would have them quitting smoking. Obviously, the main one for me would be about accessing stop smoking services so that they can increase their chances of becoming smoke-free long-term, because that is the best way to try and quit. But if we're talking sort of day-to-day tips, I think the main one for me is around keeping those motivations in mind, because it's that self-motivation to keep going that's going to keep them quit long term. I know that most smokers will probably have their family going, you really need to quit, and GPs maybe or health professionals telling them they need to quit. But unless they've got that internal motivation to quit, it can be really hard to stick with it. So I think it's a case of latching on to what those motivations are, whether it's to improve health, maybe to stop exposing family to secondhand smoke. It might be trying to improve finances. Whatever it is, if someone can keep that in mind when they're in the midst of their quit and they're really struggling, that can sometimes keep them on track, just to say, no, I know why I'm doing this, and this is more important than going back to smoking. But I think also when we talk about motivations, it's about exploring why it is that people smoke as well, because some people smoke out of habit because they've done it for such a long time, and maybe they smoke at certain times of the day. Other people it's stress, and other people it's boredom. So I think once people can lock down why it is they smoke, they can then start thinking about how they can overcome those things. If it's habit, if someone smokes first thing after they've eaten, then I'd be saying, right, what can we do to break that habit? Is it that you can maybe go and do the washing up straight away? Or maybe you can do, I don't know, a hobby that you enjoy that's going to keep you distracted. And I think once people start building up their little toolkit of things to help them stay quit, that's when people are best with their success.
It's more related to something brought up earlier of development helping with addiction. It was kind of on the idea that it's a lot harder to break an addiction if you get into it at a younger age. If you're at school and a lot of other kids around you start smoking and you start doing it, and then it just sort of becomes a part of your mental development, like most things for a kid, that it becomes a lot harder to break that tradition. It's a part of how you grew up than it is if you are going through a troubled time at like 23 years old and you start picking up smoking because you know a life without it, to one who is young who's only known their life with it.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one, and I think that when we think about also children being brought up in smoking households, so generationally it is getting to the point that there are less and less smokers. But if we go back a generation or two, a lot of the parents smoked. So being in a smoking household, you've got that impact as well. So I think the fact is that as the culture changes and society changes its opinions on smoking, hopefully there'll be less and less people getting into smoking at those early ages. But I can appreciate that when people do start smoking early, it does become such a big part of their life, and it's something that they probably can't remember a life without doing. And quite often it takes some sort of trigger for someone to make the decision that actually no, they need to make a change. So quite often people come to us because maybe they are thinking about having a baby, or they are pregnant, or maybe they are getting married, maybe it's they've had a health scare. We get a lot of people coming through after a health scare. And so sometimes those sort of things that actually kick people up the bum to think, actually, no, I can't just settle into this being my life, and I can't just keep smoking for the rest of my life. I need to do something about it. So, yeah, I think that people get too accustomed to it a lot of the time, and it does just become their way of life. And so it does normally take some sort of triggering event to maybe get them to change. And hopefully, sometimes it's something like hearing an interview on the news or seeing an advert on telly that gets people thinking about quitting. And that's the whole sort of purpose of No Smoking Day, really, is to get people thinking about what they could do around trying to quit smoking, or even trying to reduce down initially.
My focus, at least for this, is to generally ask questions of why people can start with smoking and how that ultimately affects them and just sort of part of them. And I think another one that could be is just that to people who have mental health are more susceptible to picking up smoking or other kinds of addictions because it's a supplement to something that they do not want to have, in the same way that stress can be like it. You're stressed, something's going on, and you want to block out that with something that you perceive to be a better alternative. And to people who have mental illness, if they're having something like anxiety and they had a bad day, they want to suppress that anxiety, so they supplement it with something that, even if it's ultimately negative to them and they may recognize it, they would prefer it because it also requires the path to a recovery, and that also requires fixing, or at least trying to help a problem that is something that may be out of their control in comparison to just picking it up because, again, like the cool factor.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as we go on, we're finding that a lot more of the people coming through to us and a lot more of the smokers that are still existing are people that are entrenched smokers, and normally it is because that they've got something underlying there that, you know, become a bit of a barrier to quitting. And I would say that we're seeing probably more and more of our clients coming through that have got some sort of mental health issue or diagnosis, even low-lying anxiety and depression we're seeing in, you know, majority of people that come through. But I think there's this misconception around most people that smoke probably say that it helps relieve stress or it relieves anxiety. But actually, it has been found that smoking increases those things. But like you said, adults with mental health issues and depression are much more likely to smoke than adults without depression. So actually, it's that catch-22 of people with mental health issues typically are the ones that tend to have increased prevalence of smoking, but actually it's quite often exacerbating their issues. But some of the reasons that people think that smoking actually helps their stress, one of them is the fact that people are hooked on nicotine when they're smoking, and when they go a period without any nicotine, what happens is they start experiencing withdrawal effects, and part of that is anxiety and tension. And so a way for them to relieve that is by having a cigarette, because it's getting nicotine into their system so that they stop experiencing those side effects. And it's that ongoing cycle then, as people go for withdrawal, they have a cigarette, they go for withdrawal, have a cigarette. So they're actually almost causing anxiety through having that nicotine addiction. But also when people smoke, they take deep breaths. When people inhale on a cigarette, they are taking much deeper breaths than they would do normally. And there's obviously a whole breadth of research out there that talks about deep breathing for stress relief. So actually one of the things that we often suggest to people when they're giving up smoking is, if stress is a trigger to them, to actually just try and take some deep breaths in the moment that would be similar to if they were taking deep breaths whilst enjoying a cigarette. So even if someone has trouble with mental health, they still think about trying to give up, because, like I said, it should hopefully in the long run benefit their mental health, not make it worse. I think when people maybe try and go cold turkey, or they don't have enough nicotine in a nicotine patch when they're trying to quit, they potentially are going to experience some low mood initially, because again, it's that nicotine withdrawal. But over time, that is when we see people's mental health actually improve as a result of giving up smoking.
So how about vaping? Because vaping's targeted a lot at younger people with the kind of flavours and the colours, the packaging. Are you seeing people wanting to quit that? You know, how are you dealing with vaping?
Yeah, so in the Healthy Cornwall team, when we support adults, we at the moment just support adults to quit smoking tobacco. So we don't have a quit vaping service. However, people under the age of 18 shouldn't be vaping. It is not legal to be vaping. So we do have our children and young people's team that are doing lots of work in schools to try and raise awareness of the issues around vaping at a young age. And I think that's why people get so confused and get these contradictory messages, is that children are being told not to vape, but then potentially their parents are actually using vapes to give up smoking. And that's the key message, is that vapes should be used as an equivalent to smoking, because it is a harm reduction method. So vaping is significantly safer than smoking. So for someone that is currently smoking, it's a safer method of getting off smoking, basically.
But don't vapes contain a whole load of toxins?
So if you look at what's in a cigarette as opposed to what's in a vape, there's thousands more chemicals and toxins in cigarettes than what there is in vapes. So vapes are not risk-free, I'll say that, but they are significantly safer than smoking. So obviously, I'd love it if people weren't on anything, weren't smoking, weren't vaping, but realistically, that's not going to happen. So for someone that's maybe thinking, I'm smoking at the moment, I really want to give up, I'm looking at a vape, but, you know, I don't know if I should do that or not. Vaping is a good way to get off smoking. But for someone that is not currently smoking, so young people or maybe even adults that don't currently smoke, vaping is not recommended, because there is still risk associated with vapes, but just not at such a great a level as what there is in cigarettes. I think the other key thing really is to make sure that when people are getting vapes, that they're buying them from reputable retailers, so that they're actually confident that they're covered by UK safety and quality regulations. What's actually happening is probably that people are picking up dodgy vapes, people are picking up vapes that have way more puffs in them than should be legally allowed, and actually there's a big crackdown on that at the moment. And obviously you mentioned about the fact that vapes are quite often attractive to young people, but the tobacco and vapes bill that's currently going through government, a part of that is also around trying to make sure that vapes aren't so attractive to children, and that they are being more heavily pushed towards people who are smoking, not just pushed out into the sort of general public. So I totally get where people can get concerned about vapes, and there's always news articles or people see on social media these stories about popcorn lung. I'm sure that's a term that everyone's heard of. Actually, when you look into popcorn lung was a disease that was found in a group of factory workers that were exposed to a chemical used to flavour popcorn. At one point, years and years ago, some vape liquids did contain that chemical, and that led to the idea that vapes might cause popcorn lung. But in the UK, that chemical has been banned for use in vape liquids since 2016. So there is no way that there's anyone in the UK that's got popcorn lung off the back of using a regulated vape liquid. However, if they're getting dodgy vape liquids from somewhere, then potentially that chemical may be in there. So there's a lot of myths and sort of misdirections around vapes. If you go on NHS websites or public health websites, all the information there around myth busting around vapes is really, really useful if anyone's got any questions or concerns. Our underlying line and the NCSCT's line is that vaping is significantly safer than smoking.
It's another more just general addiction-related question than it is to smoking, but I wanted to sort of talk about a general, I guess, comparison I could make is people could have what I could call a good addiction, where they are constantly using something that they may or may not perceive as bad, but ultimately is something, it's not like cigarettes, I could say something like chocolate, where people could treat something like that with the same kind of ire that they have to smoking. They put it in the cabinet, they say, I don't want to eat this, I'm not going to, and then they have a bad day, and instead of going for a cigarette, they go and say, I'll have that, and then they can treat something that could be considered normal with the same kind of ire that they do for something that most people associate with addiction, like alcohol or smoking. That's what I just want to put out there.
And that's just a change in time, isn't it? If we wound the clock back 60, 70 years, then how we look at smoking would be very different to what we are today. And even when you mention there about alcohol, and I'm no alcohol expert, but alcohol is so ingrained in our culture and society, but for some as well, consider it in the same way that you sort of have to with smoking. And that sometimes I use that as an example with our clients to say about if they've got stuff flying around at home, like you just said, if they've got tobacco, if they've got ashtrays, if they've got anything at home that reminds them of smoking, it can be really tempting to fall back into old habits and go back to smoking. In the same way that if you say, for example, you're trying to cut back on your chocolate or whatever, or trying to cut back on alcohol, if you've got it in the cupboard in arm's reach, it's very easy to go back to it. And so quite often, if I've got someone who is trying to give up smoking and they've not got any other smokers at home, a really key bit of advice really is to get rid of all of those items at home that remind them of smoking, so that actually, if they do want to smoke, they're going to have to go to the shop, buy some stuff, come home, and by the time that they've considered the effort of doing that, they normally get past that craving. So definitely to remove those things from the house is one of our key tips, but interesting to consider it in the same way, like you said, about other elements that people might use to self-soothe, I guess.
Because like the general point that I was going at is addiction may take, shape in different forms. We may have different objects that are our addiction that could be sort of generally personalized, but the reasons why we fall into addiction are for the most part the same, from upbringing to our mental health to a just general situation to the fact that we see it as something cool and desirable, or some people just because they want to. And I think that is something to highlight, is why people form addictions. And then I think that could help in their recovery process, because most people can sort of treat addictions in the way of, you presented the no smoking day. I think a lot of people can go through a day with like, all right, I'll quit smoking, and they do it for one day. Maybe they do it a second day, but by the third day there's a craving that starts coming back up. And is there sort of a way for people to, on that third day, try and convince themselves out of it that they don't need to just smoke so they can suppress the feeling and then just go in the same endless cycle?
Yeah, when someone gives up smoking, the first few days, the first week are always the hardest. As time goes by, where habits are starting to change, nicotine addiction has started to sort of reduce or abate, and the side effects have maybe subsided as well. Over time, that process does get easier, and that's why when we know someone is on our caseload and they've maybe just started a quit today, or they've started in the last week, we always make sure to try and get a hold of them in that first week, just to see how they're getting on. Have they had any side effects from maybe the treatment option they've used, or any withdrawal side effects, and how we can try and support that. But quite often, if people can get past those first few weeks, there's a load of research around the fact that if people can get to 4 weeks, they're more likely to quit for good. So in terms of success outcomes, getting to 4 weeks is a really important milestone. So we try and give as much support as possible in the first 4 weeks of someone's quit to make sure that they're getting support at home. Their treatment that we've sort of decided together is something that's actually working for them. And if we can get that combination, that's as much as we can do. But it's also then for that person to think about the things that are going to keep them busy and distracted in those moments where they're reaching for a cigarette as such. Maybe it's around the stress. You know, you talked about coping mechanisms, and that's a real important point, is that there's so many different coping mechanisms when we encounter stress. For some people, it's exercise. For some people, it's meditation. And for others, it's smoking or alcohol or eating or whatever. And it's about learning helpful and healthy coping mechanisms rather than resorting to those unhealthy coping mechanisms. But until someone realises what their triggers are and why they go for those things, it can be really hard for that person to then overcome it. But that's what quite a lot of our behavioural support is around, is trying to investigate and explore those things with a client so that they can better understand themselves to hopefully action plan going forward and increase their chances of staying quit for good.
So just as we are about to close, Olivia, how would people find out more and get in contact with Healthy Cornwall?
For anyone that's wanting to refer to Healthy Cornwall for stop smoking support, they can call 01872 324 200 or email healthy.cornwall@cornwall.gov.uk, or they can go to our Healthy Cornwall website and submit a referral form, and just be sure to tick that they're after stop smoking support specifically.
Thanks so much for speaking with us today.
That's all right. Thanks very much, and thanks for the question.
A space to speak your mind with Cornwall Mind.
So we've just heard from Olivia. So what's our kind of thoughts on smoking and the discussion that we've just had with her?
Yes, I found it was interesting. So I learnt a few facts today that apparently one cigarette can take 20 minutes of your life.
It's shocking, isn't it?
It's really shocking. I was really surprised by that. It really puts you off the terrible effects it can have on your health. And I think that she spoke in depth about that. And I think it's great work what they do.
It's just a nice insight to, see how someone who deals with a lot of this stuff can see the formations of addiction and genuinely what that entails, why they do it, and what kind of effects eventually that will have to them, and whether or not they do and do not recognize it. The older generations, looking back now, often going to seek help for it, while younger generations are probably still at a point where they're not as aware of the effects of what they do.
Or perhaps don't care.
Yeah, perhaps don't care. And if, maybe they do and they just haven't had the opportunity to hear about this kind of stuff.
I think it's interesting that she said they're helping a lot more of the older people and people who have kind of had something happen that's triggered that reason to quit, whether it's having a baby or a health concern.
Because also a societal shift for a lot of them as back in the 60s, 50s and 70s, smoking was just sort of part of of the culture.
Yeah.
People would do it. They go to bars, they go to cinemas, they go on planes, and they would just smoke as just a normal thing to do, in the same way of listening to music. And now while going outside, this is something that people just do as part of it. And now, as that shift has gone away, there's probably a few that have either noticed or are just afraid of those health side effects that has happened from that past life of this continued thing. In the same way of listening to music, people could say that constantly having earpods in and going around listening to music everywhere, and it could potentially, especially how loud the music is, eventually start damaging their hearing because they spent so long with just this constant noise right up against their ears. And maybe they'll look back and the same general form of remnants, maybe. But I think that can sort of explain why the older generations are more likely to seek help for their addiction than younger generations who are just getting into it, or, as I kind of said, they've grown up with it in a different way than the older generations. They probably also grew up with smoking, and that just became a part of them. And the generations now, they're in that same thing, but in this post-mainstream smoking way, where it's mainly seen as a sign of the renegade, or this, the character type, the guy who smokes. an anti-establishment kind of viewpoint when in its past there was, nothing more mainstream. Now it's viewed different, but its applications are still the same.
There's been a real cultural shift, hasn't there, where it's like not seen as cool anymore.
Yeah.
It's not like a cool, trendy thing to smoke.
It was in the past. It was seen as a very sort of fanciful thing. It was actresses and the celebrities and those of high status used to smoke, and that was seen as sort of being the popular, fashionable thing to do, whereas nowadays that's not the case.
Yeah, definitely. So what did we think about what Olivia said about the link in with mental health and how people think it's helping them to smoke, but actually it's really not?
I think it's down to, if you're someone who, like when I came to talk about the trauma and stuff, is if you are going through a particularly negative period of your life, there's just a lot of stuff happening, there's too much pressure on you, even if you are aware that they may have a negative consequence, you could either perceive that it does, or you all just don't care of that factor. So it may have a negative impact on your mental health, but in comparison to what you usually go through, you might just see that as the better alternative. You would rather take one negative over another because one is ultimately worse. You'd rather just spend a few hours doing stuff to your brain than you would spend 5 hours sitting there trying to figure out the uncomfortable reality that you're living in at the present moment. And so it then works on how you perceive it. Maybe it would then, like with some forms of healing, I guess I could say, is that you sort of will the effect that you want, and so that it calms your mind because you believe your mind is calm. It does have those effects, so then you believe it to be calm, and then you say, okay, well, it makes me calm, so I have to keep using this because this is the only thing that's keeping me from waking up with the harsh reality that I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow, and that scares me. And so I think it may have that side effect, but a lot of people couldn't imagine that it would because, well, the alternative that they think of is a lot worse than this normalcy that they have become used to and couldn't see a life without.
And how about vaping?
They one may have a more negative effect, but like with smoking, because you're trying to put your mind away from something, you don't ultimately care if cigarettes are worse than vapes or vapes are worse than cigarettes, because you tried a vape and it tasted horrible, so I'm never going back to that again, because I felt in that moment the effects. I felt that something was not right smoking a vape, though I think it's more vapes, they have their different flavors and such. You smoke a cigarette, the cigarette is going to, for the most part, be the same, no matter the brand. While vapes, you get in all these different flavors and stuff that permeate around you.
I did used to smoke, but only kind of casually, sort of. If I went out for a drink, I would have a smoke. But then I haven't smoked for 10 years because I got into doing sport. So doing running, I used to run a lot. And I found that when I smoked, that affected me when I was doing sports. That's why I decided to eliminate it altogether. And running sort of occupied my mind. So because I was doing that activity, it stopped me from thinking about smoking. So that was how I dealt with the habit. And because I was quite keen on improving my fitness level, that's why I stopped smoking.
So it was really positive for you?
Yeah, very positive indeed, yeah.
It's brilliant.
You're listening to A Space to Speak Your Mind. Now let's hear from Victoria chatting to Dorothy Herson.
A Space to Speak Your Mind.
And welcoming Dorothy on the line. Dorothy?
Hi, hello.
Hello, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I've been reading your fabulous new book, The Ragdoll Contract. I'm about 2/3 of the way through. Loving it so far. Tell us about it.
So, The Ragdoll Contract is a work of fiction, and that's kind of in the disclaimer at the front as well, so it's good to reiterate that.
Yes, for sure.
That is based on and inspired by my own experiences. About 8-9 years ago, I did a training contract at a big corporate firm, a Magic Circle firm, and found that sort of the pressure, the environment, the climate, the culture resulted in, as well as the pressure I put on myself, which is important. And as you'll kind of know from the book, that's an important aspect and theme of what I wanted to get across, culminated in a mental breakdown and a few weeks spent as an inpatient in a psychiatric hospital. And the book really draws from my own experiences and then kind of reflects on broader questions around insecure overachievers and why we push ourselves and why certain people enter certain careers in the first place, what draws them, and also these big corporates, what are the attributes or traits that they look for or that they desire in employees. And the book's kind of is looking at that symbiotic relationship between an insecure overachiever and the protagonist, Olivia, is exactly that. Her entire sense of identity and self-worth is derived from her grades and external validation through good appraisals or great numbers on paper. And so that's kind of the foundation of her personality, and then this law firm who benefit from that and they rely on that. If she had a sense of self-worth that kind of was derived from more than the opinions of others or appraisals or grades, then she wouldn't give every ounce of herself to the job and it wouldn't work, because these firms often only work by instilling that sort of culture in those hours. So yeah, that's what the book's getting at and what it's about and the themes it's looking at.
Yeah, I must say I can relate so much to the character Olivia. I used to work in a law firm and I had a very similar experience, I think, to what you have had. And actually the book's made me cry a few times, like thinking back about those days. And particularly the bit when she's working in a seat where she's actually really sort of quiet, not much work, and she was used to working at sort of like complete high octane levels. I myself was the same in that I loved the bits when I was like totally working fast pace, you know, devoting my whole life to my job, but not so much those down moments. I was like, oh, I've got nothing to do, like this doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I'm really glad you picked up on that, because I really wanted to emphasise that throughout the book as well, that she's kind of incapable of inhabiting, she refers to them as empty spaces, but she's incapable of just existing, and that's because her self-worth comes only from the validation. And so when she's sat with herself, it's that sort of existential dread and fear and panic, and she doesn't know who she is. And for me, that's exactly the kind of person I was as well. For so long, the way I viewed myself was so entangled with my performance that I just really didn't see any value in myself outside of those metrics. I think that was really key to why I had the breakdown and why things went so badly. It was just not being able to measure myself by any other scale. And yeah, I think it's really sad when you reflect on that and you think someone should be able to sit and not be busy, because like that's being a human being, isn't it? And that's sitting with yourself. Why can't you sit with yourself? Why do you need to be working and busy and filling the time and the hours?
But it becomes like a drug, doesn't it? It's like an addiction.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And I guess it's addictive because you're constantly sort of circumventing the need to self-analyse or reflect or think about anything. It's like when you drink a lot, you are kind of escaping the present. You're like escaping your thoughts, and it's the same principle with working really, really, really hard. You're escaping your reality, how you feel about things, any kind of discomfort or trauma or things you don't want to sit with. You can ignore them. You can just work, and work is everything. It's all consuming. And as long as I'm just doing well in this appraisal, as long as I'm just getting good feedback for this report, I'm okay. And of course, that's such a reductive way of looking at reality, because we're so much more than a piece of paper or a grade. But these environments and that kind of mindset, it cultivates that belief system.
Yeah, they completely encourage it, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. And I think in the book and in real life, we were appraised every 3 months, as is Olivia. And that's really important because it's sort of kind of instilling the idea that like never become complacent. You're never just okay. We're still going to be appraising you. We're going to be assessing you. We're going to be judging you. And if you take your foot off the gas, even just for a moment or so, it could have huge implications. So yeah, it's really encouraging that sort of constantly measuring yourself against others and scrutinizing your utilization statistics and how well you're doing. That's really everything that matters in these environments, isn't it?
Yeah, they're accounting for every 6 minutes of your time for the clients.
Yeah.
I remember times for myself when I was like, I can't even go to the toilet. I'm so busy. I've just got to carry on. I've got to carry on.
Yeah. And I think in the book I was really interested in exploring that idea of billing time in these 6-minute increments and what it means that they circulate the utilisation spreadsheet. So that means for people who haven't worked in professions where you have to do that, it means that you bill time, so your client is paying for billed time, and if you don't bill it, then you can't outsource it, you can't invoice it, and therefore it doesn't really have a value. And then these statistics are collected and then circulated around departments, so everyone can see how many hours you've billed, and then you're ranked. So certain people will have billed more than you and they'll be at the top and you might be at the bottom, and that's very anxiety inducing. But yeah, I found it really interesting and I wanted to explore that in the book. What does it mean to be judged so much by how you spend those tiny increments of your time? And the kind of mindset that it creates is, well, your time doesn't really have a value if you're not billing it. Your time isn't really important or worth anything unless it's being billed to a client. And actually, that just reinforces that sort of mindset that someone like Olivia might have, who's an insecure overachiever of my life and I am nothing more than what I achieve and these numerical values.
Yeah, and like you referred to, the competitiveness, the pitching everyone against each other. There's only 1 or 2 places on a seat. You know, there's a secondment in New York, and who's going to be able to win that seat, win that secondment, win that place, win that top prize of everything? It's just so competitive.
Yeah, the competitive element is interesting as well, isn't it? And I think there's a bit in the book where Olivia says they always had their own standards because they had impossibly high standards for themselves to beat, as well as everyone else's around them. And I think in a lot of these environments you kind of have grad schemes, don't you, or training contracts where you're the same age, you're often already friends with these peers because you've studied with them at law school in kind of these exclusive workshops. And so by the time you get to the firm, the competitiveness is already instilled, and that is itself, it's such a clever way of squeezing every last ounce of people because, yeah, you've not just got your own standards, but you've got everyone else's to worry about as well.
Yeah. Do you think things will ever change in the city in this kind of mentality that exists there, or do you think it is changing in any way?
I think, there's hope. There's a lot more awareness, and even when I was practicing, there's so much more conversation around this sort of stuff now. And, you've got charities and law care and burnout kind of reviews that are coming out. So I think there's definitely a sort of cultural shift, but whether that's actually making a difference in the firms themselves, I don't know. And I don't know if there's much evidence that we have seen a change. I think, unfortunately, even though we now have more awareness and people have a great value for work-life balance, there's also so much fear around jobs and AI replacing jobs, and there's actually a lot of people who are graduating, we know, are finding it increasingly difficult to get a job. And so alongside that kind of cultural sort of waking up, there's a desperation, and that unfortunately plays into the hands of people who profit from keeping the conditions in these environments as they are and not changing them.
Yeah, so in a way it could be getting worse.
I kind of fear that it will get worse because I know that graduates are struggling to get jobs more than they have over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, I think you'll probably agree that it's quite disturbing that there's such a high number of people who get referred to psychiatrists and end up in different places to recover, and nobody's really addressing that within these companies. Yeah, that was actually kind of the impetus and the reason behind me writing the book was when I was in this psychiatric hospital, which there's an irony in the fact that it's paid for kind of inadvertently by the firm because they give you this private medical insurance, which is amazing. And it's
really
great, isn't it? Really great. It covers everything,
So you're also oh, okay, so the psychiatrist I'm seeing is getting a stream of clients that are coming from this firm. Is he or is she really going to say to me, the best thing you can do is quit? Who's the real customer there? Do you know what I mean? Who's the real customer? It's something that I considered a lot. But when I got into the psychiatric hospital, and there were just lots of people from the magic circle there.
Same for me, and from banking as well.
And a lot of women, a lot of high achievers from the city who were, by kind of their own admission, totally and utterly burnt out or mentally wrecked. And I sort of was interested in that, and also the silence around it, because it's really not publicly aired in the way you might expect, sort of how extreme it is.
There definitely should be more done within the city, I think, to address this and to make it more widely known. People seem to just kind of disappear from their desks, and then who knows whether or not anyone talks about what's really happened.
Yeah, exactly. And that there's a bit at the end in the last section of the book, actually, where the protagonist, Olivia, she notices that people are exactly like you say, just disappearing. And then she says, like, talk business icons going from green to red, so kind of like people going from there to away indefinitely, and this sort of no one speaking about it. And I don't know if you found that. Did you find that?
Yeah, nobody spoke about it. I still don't know what people actually thought about my absence.
Yeah.
It's just really odd. It's like the whole thing is really strange. I mean, do you have friends and people that you know who work within those firms?
Yeah, I'd say most people I know did leave quite rapidly.
Yeah, yeah.
But there are a few who stayed there. Mainly, I'd say they found a kind of a corner of the firm that was maybe a less transactional department, like a more advisory role where the hours just weren't so bad. They found a really nice team. And I think there were definitely people who found little areas of the firm that worked for them. I don't think it's all bad. I think it's, unfortunately, it's luck of the draw, really, where you end up, what seats, what the legal and regulatory climate is around that time that you're there. So, yeah, I think some people make it work. I think they do.
Yeah, because there is a character within the book who actually seems to make it work. He's making it work at this point anyway, being a bit more nonchalant about everything.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Henry. The reason I thought Henry was an important character to have in the book is because even though it feels probably for the reader and definitely for Olivia like she's being forced to stay at her desk, she's being forced to work these hours, Henry kind of shows that you can just go in and work 9 to 5, and that was something I really wanted to accept some accountability for what happened to me, because yes, the environment was horrendous, but I was involved in my downfall. You know, I stayed at my desk. They didn't chain me there. I was actually free to go. Yeah. And I felt like it was important to highlight that. It's kind of, you know, it's like the mind-forged manacles. You're conditioned through, partly it's the fault of the education system and then how you've kind of invalidated, but you're sort of conditioned in such a way that you feel trapped there, and actually you're not trapped.
Totally. I really like that you've kind of highlighted that. And I've said that to, you know, many of my friends. It was my fault as well. I overworked and I took on those extra hours. You know, like you say, they don't chain you to the desk. It is encouraged, but there's a two-way street there.
Yeah. And I guess looking back, the only thing I will say, or that I do think, and I sort of mention quite often in the book, that they're so young, you know, they're like 21 or 22. Yeah. And now as a 31-year-old, when I look at someone who's just come out of university, you know, 22-year-old, and I think, that's when it's more problematic, because I think, you know, you are just still really a kind of a child at that age, and you're just not really in a position where you can make sensible choices. So that's where I think the kind of grey area comes in, like with the sort of younger people that are being encouraged to stay up all night.
Yeah, so where do you think we can improve this? Is it kind of like something that should happen maybe for younger people at school and at university maybe?
Yeah, I really feel like it is a kind of systemic issue. And yes, the law firms and the banks and the people who are kind of exploiting these individuals, that they should be included in the conversation, but it is a much bigger issue. And I think so much of it is like how we value people in this country from a young age. You're streamed, you're told which set you're in, like that determines sort of which GCSEs you can do. You're assessed at AS level, I think it's changed, assessed at A level, assessed throughout your degree, and you're constantly told, you have to do well. If you don't do well, you're not going to get a job. And really, like, you tie so much of your worth to how well you do and how you're judged in tests and exams and appraisals. It builds a very unhealthy mindset, especially if you go to a school, like my school was a state school. They didn't have much extracurricular stuff going on, and there wasn't another outlet to kind of make you feel like you were a well-rounded person. There weren't like cricket or rugby. There weren't other things that could make you feel like your value was a bit more than just your grades.
Yes.
Because all you had to go by was your grades. That was it.
Yeah, I went to a grammar school, selective school in Kent. You know, it was just complete. You've got to achieve, you've got to achieve, you've got to go to university, you've got to be the best.
Yeah, and you look back and you know now how important every other area of your life is, you know, your physical health, your mental health, your relationships, your community where you live. These things are as important as your job, and yet why, when you're growing up, is none of it given any kind of credence? It's just we focus so much on your grades.
Yeah, achievement all the time.
Yeah, I think that's the nature of the system, isn't it? It's not that you get your A-levels and then everyone says, you proved yourself now, you don't have to do anything, you've proved that you're bright. It's just, okay, and now it's the next step, which is like your first year at university, your second, your third, then the grad scheme. So I think it's instilled in you, and certainly for me, for an insecure overachiever, I don't think you ever reach that moment where you think, okay, I can look at all my achievements and I can sit here and think, enough's enough. I've proven myself and I've achieved everything I set out to achieve, and I'll be happy for the rest of my life. It's like similar, I think there's a term called hedonic adaptation, where people just constantly adapt to their circumstances. So they get a big house, they adapt, they want a bigger one, they get a bigger house, or you get a promotion, you adapt and you want a bigger promotion. It's the same, I think, with insecure overachievers and achievement. You just constantly adapt to what you've achieved, your sort of situation where you're at, and you feel like you've got to aim higher, you've got to work for that next level, because up there, that's where you'll find happiness.
Yeah, always chasing that next goal.
Yeah, it's like often after big milestones, like I know publishing a book, or when an athlete's completed a race they've been training for a long time, often they expect to feel elated, and they actually get this period of depression. And Olivia experiences that all throughout the book, where she expects to feel elation. There's actually a feeling of kind of abandonment or loss or isolation, or it's exactly as you've just mentioned. I think it's that feeling of, if I just achieve that, then I'll be happy, and then you get there and then you think, oh, what now?
I don't think we ever really let it go, though, do we? Do you feel that you've still got some of that inside of you, even now?
Yeah, do you know, it's funny you ask that, because I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I don't think it ever goes. And I think it just, you find a new environment and new targets to attach to. But yeah, like I was thinking, oh, if I just publish my book, and then you publish the book and you're like, is it just the kind of the human condition that we're always reaching for that next summit? I try very hard now to practice appreciation for things in the day, and I certainly am much better at looking at my life and being like, these are all the lovely things about your life right now, whereas in the past it was much more, nothing's good until you've achieved that thing.
Kind of more positive outlook.
Yeah. I don't know, 'cause we're told that ambition and having goals is such a great thing, aren't we? And we're really kind of sold that idea. But then you look at people who are just really, really happy with what they're doing, who are just content and present, and wonder maybe actually if that's not a better way to exist.
I know, sometimes I wish I was one of those people.
Yeah.
So what are you doing now? Because you're a mental health activist, a speaker, obviously a writer. What are you up to?
So I write and I edit and write for a journal with Cambridge University Press, which is called Depression. It's basically a journal that kind of looks at research and evidence and lived experience around depression and mood disorders and anxiety and mental health issues. So that takes up quite a lot of time, and then I do quite a lot of sort of ad hoc mental health things like talks, and I launched a pamphlet recently about how the cost of living crisis has impacted mental health in the UK, and turns out a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have less of a single goal now and more just doing what interests me, which feels more natural. I'm applying for a PhD at the moment. So
oh wow, what are you going to study?
So it's actually a PhD which is kind of interdisciplinary. It's medicine and literature, and it's the relationship between writing and healing. So for me, I'm really interested in that because I love writing and I also love psychology. I have bipolar disorder, and I'm interested in like how that can be communicated and helped and soothed in ways through writing, and also how we can use people's writing about their mental health to better further our understanding and our kind of scientific research around that as well. That's the thing. I wrote an essay recently, and they're starting to see mood disorders now as energy disorders. And I think when you look at someone's writing who has a mood disorder, for me, certainly I keep a diary, and in the months when I'm in an elevated state, hypomanic or manic, my writing reflects that. So through the pace, through my vocabulary, through how much of it there is, rhythm, and then in the periods where I'm low or depressed, there's either an absence of writing or it's a much slower pace. And that's an interesting way of experientially documenting something, that we're actually managing to evidence something, this theory, through someone's lived experience through their writing. And I find that really interesting. I guess I wanted to ask quickly, Victoria, when you said, do I think it ever gets better with the insecure overachiever stuff? Do you feel like it has for you?
No.
Okay, yeah.
There's always a new goal. So, yeah, I decided I might stand for Parliament, got a bit of paper to say I can do that now. Then I set myself sights on radio and got involved with this. There's always something new, and I've always got these goals, and I'm going, but if I do that, that might be really good. I think it's so great that we're talking about this kind of stuff, and your book has got us talking about this.
Yeah, I really appreciate you reading it and taking the time to chat to me, because these are all things that I've thought about for a long time and written about, but it can be quite isolating and you're just sort of on your own with all these thoughts. It's so nice to finally be able to discuss it with other people.
I really hope we can get you back on the show in person next time.
Yep, I'll be there.
Oh, well, it's been so great to talk to you, Dorothy. We've had so much fun, and I'm so excited about your book, and, all the best with that.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat to me, and it's been a really nice experience. So thank you. Bye-bye.
A space to speak your mind with Cornwall Mind.
That's all for today's programme.
If you miss anything, you can download the podcast right now on Apple, Spotify, or Amazon Podcasts.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear the new episode when it comes out, or listen back to any of our previous programmes.
For support and more information for better mental health, visit cornwallmind.org or call the Mind Helpline during office hours, or call the NHS Helpline at 111 and then press 2.
This gives you another way to get urgent help if you're struggling with your mental health.
And you can call the Samaritans anytime for free at 116-123.
If you'd like to be part of the show, you can get in contact. Email us spacetospeakyourmind@gmail.com.
And you can find out more about the show if you follow Cornwall Mind on Facebook or Instagram, or their website at cornwallmind.org.
A space to speak your mind with Cornwall Mind.
Welcome to Champs Unplugged, the podcast where we champion the voices of people with learning disabilities and autistic people in Cornwall. Join us as we chat about health, accessibility, and living our best lives.
Coming soon, Champs Unplugged, a brand new podcast made by people with a learning disability and autistic people right here in Cornwall.
We're here to share our stories, talk about the work we do in the community, and chat with special guests to help make life better for people like us.
So if you want real conversations, great advice and inspiring stories,
tune in soon to Champs Unplugged, because everyone deserves to live a happy, healthy life.